All right, I am so excited to be here. So we're going to talk about chaos today. Chaos engineering, everything is going to be on fire today. So who here has done chaos engineering before? Literally not a hand. Cool, this is going to be good. This is going to be good. Has anyone heard of Chaos Monkey before? All right, a few more. Okay, I've been oft the victim of Chaos Monkey, so we will get there. So I want to talk about entropy for a second. This is a chemistry term, which is not something you want to listen to me about. I definitely failed chemistry a few times. But I want to tell you a little bit about what entropy is. So entropy is the idea of disorder, right? It's the idea that, let's get into this, the second law of thermodynamics here. So there's a couple laws of thermodynamics. Again, you don't want to listen to me about physics or thermodynamics or anything like this, but this one's actually kind of interesting. It's the idea that things do not get more ordered by themselves. That over time, everything becomes more and more disordered. In fact, one of the equations that you have to hold true inside of a fixed system, that over time, it gets more disordered, that things do not spontaneously get more ordered over time. It's kind of the idea that if you have a house, that it doesn't spontaneously build itself, right? If I have a bunch of building materials and I just start throwing them, you don't build a house, right? This is important because you have to think about that I have materials, but I also have to add energy into something to get it into something more ordered. Now, why do I care? Or why are we talking about chemistry? Why are we talking about physics? Why is any of this important to me right now for what I do? And it's because your systems don't spontaneously become resilient. Now, this is something that the back-end community, and actually really more the DevOps community, has really latched onto. There was a guy but a team at Amazon some years back that decided we need to start basically throwing entropy into our systems, encourage chaos inside of our systems so that we can see what happens when chaos starts happening interior, right? Because when we're writing code as developers, when we're writing infrastructure as engineers, we kind of assume best case scenarios, right? How many times have you said, it works on my computer, right? I have. I literally said it this morning. So we want to avoid those problems. And the reason why is that it works on your computer and it doesn't work on someone else's computer is because when you put it out into the world, it started trying to exist inside of this world full of entropy, full of chaos. And so this team at Amazon, which then eventually a bunch of those engineers went from Amazon to work at this tiny little startup called Netflix. You might have heard of it. And they started actually kind of putting these chaotic things into, these chaotic means into their infrastructure and to see what happened. And this kind of evolved over time to become Chaos Monkey. I used to work at Netflix, and so I'd be working on some server, trying to figure out debug it or something like that, or trying to get some new feature out. And all of a sudden, everything would start on fire, and I was like, what the hell happened, right? Either I'd run out of RAM spontaneously, or it would peg the CPU or something like that, or it would bring down development servers, or development databases would have a lot of latency, and I just wouldn't have any idea what it's doing. And then, after kind of thinking through it a little bit, I would realize that it was Chaos Monkey just descended to wreak havoc on my life. Literally hours off my life, by the way. Probably years, if we're being honest. So, this kind of gets us to the point that systems over time get more disordered. That if you leave a system out that has 6 years of uptime, at some point something's just going to happen that's going to bring it down. Over time, it gets more disordered. There's actually something that's called the eventual heat death of the universe, right? That eventually we will all die because our entire universe will become too entropic and we'll all just fizzle away. Luckily that's a billion years away, but gift warning, by the way. Yeah, this got real dark real quick, right? So, I wanted to kind of introduce myself, why you should be listening to me, or maybe not be listening to me, about chaos engineering. So my name is Brian Holt. I am from Seattle. I just moved there recently. So while technically all of my things are in Seattle, it still feels kind of like an Airbnb to me. I was so excited to get invited here to come to ScotlandJS. I love Scotland, as you can see here. I was just barely on Islay, which is now probably my favorite place on earth. And that's my lovely wife who came with me. She was very nice to let me drink a lot of scotch for a couple of days. Lafroig, that was the best one, in case you were going to ask me, or Ardbeg. I can't decide. Anyway, I work at this tiny startup that you see up there at the top, Microsoft as we prefer. No, I'm just kidding, it's Microsoft. Worked at a couple other little tiny companies up there. I was the director of development, front-end development for a little bit at Reddit. Then I worked at Netflix for a couple of years, and particularly worked with some of the chaos stuff, non-member experiences on the TV as well, which was a exercise in frustration if you've ever tried to work on a Roku. And lastly, I worked at LinkedIn, which I guess technically is Microsoft, so I transferred into Microsoft after that. I now work on Azure, which is our cloud, specifically as a cloud developer advocate, kind of trying to help Azure be more friendly to you, and also just to convince you that Microsoft even has a cloud. It does, in case you're wondering. So, why are we talking about infrastructure things, right? This is probably why no one raised their hand here, is that front-end chaos engineering is not really a thing. It's not something that's been talked about. A lot of my good friends work at a company called Gremlin, which I'm a big fan of. And Gremlin is basically Chaos Monkey as a service. I think that's kind of selling a bit short, but that's a good way to kind of think about it. And so we're always kind of collaborating and trying to figure out, cool ways that because I think this idea of introducing entropy into systems so that you don't have this problem of works my computer anymore is something that should apply to us. And then I kind of got down to this pathway of thinking of we as front-end engineers, we've been dealing with chaos forever. Think about all the ways that your environment is entropic. How many browsers do you have to work on, right? You have to work on IE, you have to work on Edge, you have to work on mobile Safari, you have to work on normal Safari, you have to work on all sorts of crazy things, right? So we have to deal with just browsers like that. We have to work on various versions of JavaScript engines, on various HTML renderings. We have to work with various devices, that's been a pain, right? Different screen sizes, all these kind of entropy is being entered into our world. Things that we cannot predict. Not only can we not predict them, but we're going to have to face literally the entire gambit, right? Another facet of that is we have to work with all these kind of sort of network latencies, right? We're entirely at the mercy of network latencies. So not only do you have to work on 2G, 14 kilobits per second, you also have to work well on what would it be, 1 million kilobits per second, right? Gigabit fiber, right? And you have to work from 14 to 1 million and work well on both ends of that spectrum. So this is something that now I see more head nods now. It's yeah, I do that. I do too, and it's kind of a pain. So I guess this is what I'm trying to get at, is that we work in a chaotic environment, chaos engineering. We didn't try to do chaos engineering. Chaos engineering came to us. And we've been dealing with it for a long time. So this is kind of what I'm trying to get at, is if we already deal with these kind of chaotic conditions, then why do we have this works on my machine problem? And it's because, we put things out into the wild, into these chaotic environments, but our development environment is this walled garden, right? It's beautiful, and you stroll about, and everything's on localhost, so it's very quick. And it's all working on the latest version of Firefox or latest version of Chrome or something like that. And you don't have to worry about IE6. Who here has IE6 on their computer? Uninstall it, please. So this is what I want to get you thinking about this. I kind of have been going over this presentation in my head, and it's what do I want you to get out of this? And honestly, I think this is more just an inspiration talk. I want you to think about how you can introduce chaos into your environment and how you can make things more chaotic and be less of this problem that you can have, works on my machine, you want to get more into these that it works all the time. You have resilience. So I wanted to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of exactly what chaos engineering is, because I think this will be helpful in your spiritual journey of chaos. That sounds weird. So chaos engineering, let's talk about what Chaos Monkey really, like the first iteration of Chaos Monkey is that I had 100 servers out there, and I wanted to test that my failover worked correctly. So what I would do is I would pick out one random server, and I would just either take it out of rotation, or I would pin its CPU at 100%, or I would make it run out of memory, or something like that. At this point, you could test to make sure if your infrastructure would be self-healing, right? That might not be a term that as a front-end developer you have heard before, but it's something that they use a lot in the DevOps community, is that they have self-healing infrastructure. Now, if I have one of my app servers and my cluster go down, what they want you to do is they want you to detect that something is wrong with it. They want you to rotate that out. They want you to take the load balancer and point it at something else, and if needed, spin up another server that then took the place of the other one. That's kind of the ideal situation. However, that doesn't really happen unless you kind of make those things happen. That just doesn't happen by itself. It's the same idea that if you throw building materials, it doesn't spontaneously erect into a house. So let's kind of give you a diagram of what that might look like. This might be some sort of service that you have built for yourself. I don't think there's anything particularly interesting here. It's more of a microservice-oriented architecture, but I think that should be okay. You can't go to a Netflix engineering talk without having heard microservice at least 19 times. This is something that looks similar to what I was working on when I was at Reddit, if we're being honest, except it wasn't Ruby. It was Python, but pretty close nonetheless. So what are our points of failure here, right? Well, it's MongoDB, so MongoDB, if you shard it pretty well, works pretty well, especially if you do sharding and clustering and primaries and secondaries, it works really well. And you have those various microservices, but you could probably have multiple of those app servers, but something that you might be, that can be hard, it can be hard to diagnose where problems end up. So if I have a problem with my front-end service, then I'm going to have eventually a problem with just the front ends, but all the mobile apps are going to work, right? So you can tell pretty quickly, it's like, okay, Rails blew up, so that makes all my front-end services fail, so yeah, I can follow that pretty quickly, right? But then you kind of run into more insidious problems, like what happens if Redis blows up? Well, okay, so Redis blows up, so now it's going to start hitting the database directly. And if you start getting a lot of queries against that database, what's going to happen to the database? It's going to start on fire, and then all your services start on fire, and then everything's on fire. But here's the problem. It takes a while for, once you start missing all those cache hits, to start overwhelming the database. So where do you think the problem is? Probably with the database. And so you're going to start investigating problems with the database and not realizing that it actually was Redis that was the problem. That was actually your real single point of failure. It's another thing that the DevOps community is really, really trying hard to mitigate is single points of failure. So if you had a better self-healing infrastructure, if you notice that your Redis service was down, first of all the alarm bells would go off, right? And you would also probably have multiple different clusters or various sharding techniques or something of that effect. So another GIF warning. It looks a little something like this. Or rather, this is what chaos engineering can look like to some people. It's like, why are we, trying to start things on fire? I'm just going to cause downtime to myself, and why would I intentionally cause downtime if I don't already have downtime? So I have a question to pose to you. Would you rather be paged at 2 a.m. on a Saturday or 2 p.m. on a Tuesday? Now, the reason why I pose that question to you is if you're doing chaos engineering, you're going to start chaos exercise at a reasonable time and not at midnight, which means that if you do have points of failure, you're going to discover them during working hours and not when you get paged for it. Furthermore, you're going to know why you have problems, because if I take down the cache server, for example, then I'm going to see right away that this is what happens when the cache server goes down. Because you already know what the cause is because you caused it. So, GIF warning. It's just being smart. That's what I think. So, a really, really smart engineer whose name is Tammy Butau. I'm sure I'm not saying that correctly. She's, again, huge in the chaos engineering community, called this, it's like a vaccine, right? What is a vaccine? You take a little bit of a deceased disease and you put it in your body, which is chaotic, right? Like, why are you putting disease in your body, right? But then your immune system fights off and learns how to fight that off. This is the same idea behind chaos engineering. It's like, let's introduce a little bit of disease into our system and see if our system can fight it off. And if it can't, then we learn what's wrong with it. We can go back and fix it and move forward rather than just being at the mercy of our chaotic environment until eventually it comes to haunt us. So, chaos engineering is the discipline of experimenting on a distributed system in order to build confidence in a system's capability to withstand turbulent conditions in production. This is from the principlesofchaos.org. It's a really interesting website. Again, it's more oriented toward the DevOps community, but I think it has applications for us as front-end developers. This is the idea that I want you to be thinking about. How can I introduce chaos into my development process so I do not face it in production environments? It's a great tweet. I wish I could remember who said it. That basically said, all companies have testing environments. Some companies are lucky enough to have production environments. I think this is true. If you're not experimenting, then you're going to start having problems. So at this point, you might say, GIF warning, by the way. What do I do? This is kind of how I feel all the time, especially when it comes to these DevOps kind of thing. Like I went from working at Netflix, where I was primarily a React developer, did a lot of Node development as well, but zero infrastructure development, right? And I started going and working on infrastructure and doing things with Kubernetes and Docker and all these kind of different infrastructure things. That's why I start thinking about all these kind of crazy things, is because that's my job now, basically. So I want to share with you things that I've started doing about chaos engineering and how we can kind of get it into front-end development, but I'm interested to kind of see what directions that you all go with this as well. So something you can do right now for your company is chaos engineering is developing into a real solid field for the DevOps community. This is something that they're really thinking about extensively. So just in general, it's probably good for you to take this idea back to your company if you're not already doing it. And two easy way to do this is Chaos Monkey. That's the logo for Chaos Monkey. Open source project. Netflix isn't necessarily developing the standalone Chaos Monkey anymore. It's built into another project called Spinnaker, which is great if you use Spinnaker. It's difficult to use if you're not. But Gremlin is a service. Again, it's a paid service, but I think it's really great. That will do this resiliency as a service for you. So that's something already that you can already do, is take this kind of chaos engineering back for your DevOps community. Something we do at Azure as well, we have something called Azure Fault Analysis Service, which is built into kind of our infrastructure. So if you're on Azure, I think you could probably get this working off of Azure too. And you can just run chaos, very small chaos experiments. This is a lot more limited than what Gremlin does, but it's also really easy if you're already using Azure. That will work well for you. Something that I do like about the Azure fault analysis service is it has some awareness of what will bring down your system, and it will not allow you to bring down your entire system, right? Kind of the point here is you don't want to take down the whole system. You want to find like cracks and things that are like going to slow you down and those sorts of things. But if it says like, hey, if I take this down, you're going to make these other things fail, it's going to tell you that, which is probably telling you like, you should probably fix that. So now I want to get into kind of my more experimental thing. I built a little thing called Chaos Imp. And credit to that username that I can't pronounce for the icon. Chaos Imp is my kind of first foray into building something that will allow us to do chaos experimenting on the front end. I do have bad news for you. I borked it. So it doesn't work. But I'm working on it. But the idea behind Chaos Imp is how can I introduce some level of chaos into my development process so that I can fix problems now rather than fix problems later. So I identified, at least for me when I was working at Netflix in particular, what caused the most bugs to arise from things working on my computer and not working in production. Kind of came up with 3 different ideas. One, how many of you in here have to do more languages than just English or whatever your primary language is? A lot of people, right? I'm seeing a lot of hands, right? So Netflix supported, I think when I was there, 26 languages, and I was responsible for maybe like introduction of like 10 or 15 of those languages while I was there. So I did things like Hebrew and Turkish. German was already there, but doing things like Dutch, Japanese, like all sorts of things that the introduction of different languages really added a lot of chaos into my process, right? Like anyone that's done I18N before just has like this like 1,000-foot stare of like, I've been there, right? And I can think, oh man, I could go through all the languages, right? Like the problem with German is that those words are super long, right? It overflows into the next line, and like I wish Germans would just learn to not shove all their languages together. Or all their words together. Turkish, like all the diacritics that would go up like 15 word lengths, right? And they just like overflow vertically. That was a problem. Dealing with pictographs like Chinese and Japanese were really difficult because obviously I speak none of these languages, right? Like I speak of, English, ostensibly. The president's English, as we call it. Just kidding. No one says that. And I could go on and on. Dealing with right to left as well, right? That's another big one. But like, how much time do I have? Okay, right to left. But we learned when we were localizing in Arabic is that you flip most of the UI, right? They expect more things that will go on the left for us, go on the right for them, and there's probably people who speak Arabic in here. But the thing that we found out after we released it is that the scrubber, right, the thing at the bottom, like as the movie plays, still goes left to right. And so, like things like that, things that you wouldn't expect. I guess the reason for that is VCRs, I was told, right, that they still had like Western VCRs, which I thought was really interesting. Anyway, so languages was one of them. Latency is another one, that things that took too long or went too fast. That was another thing. And then viewports, right? Viewport sizes and also device speeds. So I built Chaos Imp that every time you refresh the page, so this is an article on CSS tricks from my coworker Sarah Drasner, who is fantastic, and you should read this article, it's really good. Not the point of this talk, but every time you refresh the page, it changes the language, it changes the viewport, and it changes the latency, and it changes how fast the device is. So it's just a nice way to introduce chaos into your refreshing process. And so this worked several times before I broke everything. This was German, I think, with like an iPhone and medium speeds. And then this went into portrait mode, which like this would be something that you might look at. Right? It's like, this doesn't look great on this kind of like more horizontal in Japanese. So this is something that I would have caught probably a lot sooner. And so I'm kind of working these things out. This was all right now just built with really crappy AppleScript, so I'm working on making an extension, but I'm hoping to have it done within the next couple of weeks, and I'll tweet it out, so hopefully, I wanted it to be done today, but obviously didn't work. And the last, I felt like this was like, right before I was coming in here trying to get it to work, the last thing that I got to work was with Scottish Gaelic. I felt like it was a sign. So, just to kind of wrap up here, find ways to introduce chaos into your systems. Find ways to make your services more resilient. It'll make you so you get paged less, which I think makes us all a little happier because no one wants to get paged. Thank you.